My name is Elena Cruz. I'm 34 years old, and last night my sister tried to destroy me in front of everyone. Look at Elena, still nobody special. Sophia's voice cut through the anniversary party like a blade. Your cousins are doctors, engineers, and you? She smiled like a shark. What do you even do again? Some kind of glorified file clerk? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before I could answer, the room went silent in that way rooms do when someone's about to get publicly executed. 23 family members, all eyes on me, waiting for the punchline they'd heard 1,000 times before. Elena works at a courthouse, my mother said softly, not even looking up from her plate. She helps with paperwork. The laughter rippled through the room like poison in water. My cousin Marcus, the cardiologist, shook his head with fake sympathy. My Aunt Carmen whispered something to her husband about wasted potential. And Sofia? She was glowing, absolutely radiant in her moment of superiority. It wasn't the first time Sofia made me her punchline. She's been doing it for years. And the worst part? No one ever stopped her. 5 years ago, at Marcus's engagement party, I stood in the corner holding a paper plate while Sofia raised her glass like a queen. To Marcus and Isabella, another power couple in our family of achievers. The cheers exploded around the room. Then she turned to me with that same shark smile. And to Elena, who's still figuring things out. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 pairs of eyes, some pitying, some embarrassed, all of them looking anywhere but at me. I forced a smile and raised my plastic cup of cheap wine, playing along with their script. They said I was independent, that I'd figure things out. But that wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse to ignore me. My success never looked shiny enough for their taste. When I graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown Law, there was no party, no toast, just me standing in my parents' kitchen holding my diploma like an idiot. "Oh, that's nice, mija," my mother said softly, without even looking up from washing dishes. My father nodded from behind his newspaper. "Well, someone's got to do the paperwork." And Sofia? She laughed when I told her over the phone. Guess every family needs a clerk. I swallowed it all. Every insult, every comparison, every casual dismissal. Because in their world, success meant something loud, something easy to brag about at cocktail parties. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, those were real jobs. What I did? Filing papers, shuffling documents, background noise. I thought if I worked harder, maybe they'd finally see me. But the truth? They needed me invisible. For years, I let them believe their version of me, a background character in their blockbuster family story. I played along, smiled through the jokes, because the truth is, they wouldn't understand my real life even if I shouted it from the rooftops. My work was silent by design, the kind you can't post on LinkedIn or brag about at dinner parties. Every holiday dinner, Sofia would turn me into a prop. Elena's good at, what is it again? Filing things? Laughter followed like a cruel echo, and I'd sit there, fork halfway to my mouth, pretending it didn't cut deeper each time. Once, after a particularly brutal Christmas dinner, I found my mother in the kitchen, hands buried in soapy water. I finally broke. Do you have any idea what it feels like? My voice cracked, being compared to them every single day. She didn't look up, just sighed, drying her hands on a dish towel. You know how your sister is. Let it go. For the sake of peace. Dad overheard from the doorway and shrugged. Mija, this is just how things are. Then came the line that gutted me. You're the strong one, Elena. You can handle it. Strong. As if that word could patch the 1,000 cuts of being unseen. So, I stopped trying. I buried myself in work. 18-hour days, sleepless nights, birthdays spent alone in my sterile apartment. Friendships faded, dating became impossible, Every time the phone rang at 3 a.m., I answered. Every time a crisis hit, I showed up. But deep down, one question haunted me. If I vanished tomorrow, would they even notice? And then came tonight's party. Another stage, another script where I played the fool. Sofia was in her element, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Elena, you won't do again? Still pushing papers around some government office? The laughter stung more than ever. My cousin Daniel tried to speak up. Come on, Sofia, that's enough. But his voice drowned in the chorus of chuckles. And just as I opened my mouth to give them the same tired explanation I'd been giving for years, everything changed. My phone buzzed, then again. Then it started ringing with that specific tone I'd programmed for work emergencies. The room noise faded to background static as I glanced at my phone screen. The caller ID made my stomach drop. SCOTUS urgent. Excuse me, I mumbled, stepping toward the hallway. Sofia's voice followed me like a shadow. Oh, let me guess, she called out, projecting for the whole room. The filing cabinet emergency hotline? More laughter. I ignored it and answered the phone. Elena Cruz. Miss Cruz, this is Deputy Marshal Richardson from the Supreme Court. Justice Hale needs you immediately. We have a situation that requires your direct oversight. My blood went cold. How urgent? Code Priority 1. The justice specifically requested you by name. A car is en route to your location now. I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Ma'am? The deputy's voice carried that particular weight that meant the world was about to shift. Justice Hale asked me to remind you, the court is waiting, Chief. And there it was, the truth, detonating in my childhood living room like a bomb. The black sedan pulled away from the curb, leaving my family's shocked faces in the rearview mirror. Through the tinted windows, I watched the suburban streets of my childhood fade into darkness. Ma'am, Deputy Marshal Richardson said from the front passenger seat, ETA to the court is 22 minutes. Justice Hale is in his chambers reviewing preliminary briefs. I nodded, trying to shift mental gears from family drama to constitutional crisis. But in the quiet hum of the government vehicle, memories crashed over me like waves. 7 years ago, standing in the marbled halls of the Supreme Court for the first time as a fellowship candidate. I was 27, broke, wearing my only good suit, a hand-me-down from my cousin that didn't quite fit. The other fellows came from Harvard, Yale, Stanford. Their parents were senators, judges, law firm partners. Me? I was Elena Cruz from nowhere, whose parents thought she was applying to be a secretary. I remembered the day I met Justice Hale. I'd been working 18-hour days in the court's research library, diving into precedent cases that other fellows considered grunt work, but I loved it. The precision, the weight of history in every decision, the way legal logic could change the course of a nation. Miss Cruz? His voice had startled me. I looked up to find Justice Richard Hale himself standing beside my desk, surrounded by towers of legal texts. I've been reading your research on constitutional interpretation theory. I scrambled to stand, knocking over my coffee in the process. Justice Hale, I'm so sorry. I can clean this up. Sit, he said firmly, then sat across from me like we were equals. Your analysis of the 14th Amendment's application to modern privacy law, where did that insight come from? I stared at him, this giant of American jurisprudence, asking me about my thoughts. I spend a lot of time thinking about what the Constitution means for people who weren't originally included in We the People like my family. He nodded slowly. The law isn't just theory for you. No, sir, it's survival. That conversation changed everything. Justice Hale didn't just see my potential, he invested in it. Late nights discussing constitutional philosophy, mentorship that felt more like intellectual combat. He pushed me harder than anyone in my family ever had because he believed I could handle it. You have a rare gift, Elena, he told me months later when offering me the position. You see the human heart of legal principles, This court needs that clarity. Chief Legal Strategist at 31, the youngest person ever appointed to guide the Supreme Court's most complex constitutional cases. The job that required security clearances my family couldn't even pronounce. And what did I tell them? I got a job at a courthouse. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. How do you explain that your filing job involves shaping legal precedent that will govern the country for generations? How do you tell your parents that senators call you for constitutional guidance, that your briefings influence decisions that make front-page news? You don't. You let them think you're a clerk because it's easier than watching them try to process that your disappointment helps run the American legal system. The car turned onto Constitution Avenue, and the Supreme Court building came into view. Even at night, it commanded reverence. Those marble columns holding up more than just a roof, but the weight of justice itself. My phone buzzed with text after text from the family I just left behind. Sofia, Elena, what the hell is happening? Mom, Mija, are you in trouble? Should we call someone? Marcus, is this real? Are you actually important? Daniel, holy shit, Elena, I always knew you were more. I turned the phone face down. For 7 years, I'd lived 2 lives. Elena, the family disappointment, and Chief Cruz, who helped decide the constitutional fate of America. Tonight, those worlds collided. The sedan pulled up to the court's staff entrance. Security guards nodded respectfully as I approached. Good evening, Chief Cruz. Justice Hale is waiting. Chief Cruz. Not Elena who files papers, not the family disappointment. Chief. I walked through those marble halls with my heels clicking against centuries of legal history, past portraits of justices who shaped this nation, through corridors where the most important legal minds in America debated the meaning of justice. This was my world, the world I'd sacrificed everything for, while my family measured success in Instagram-worthy achievements and dinner party bragging rights. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sofia. You could have told us. We would have been proud. I almost laughed. Proud now when the secret was out. Not when I was working 100-hour weeks. Not when I missed every birthday and holiday for constitutional crises. Not when I was building something extraordinary in silence. The elevator climbed toward Justice Hale's chambers, each floor taking me further from the girl who used to beg for her family's approval. Tonight, I would help save the constitutional foundation of American democracy. Tomorrow, I would decide if my family deserved a place in the life I'd built without them. The elevator doors opened to reveal the Supreme Court's inner sanctum. Even at 10 p.m., the halls buzzed with quiet urgency. Law clerks hurried past carrying thick briefs, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old carpets. The air smelled like leather-bound books and the weight of history. Elena, Justice Hale's voice boomed from his chamber doorway. Even in his 70s, Richard Hale commanded attention. 6 feet tall, silver hair perfectly combed despite the late hour, eyes sharp enough to cut through constitutional ambiguity. Justice Hale? I straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar shift as Elena the disappointment melted away and Chief Cruz stepped forward. Welcome back, Chief. The bench has missed your clarity. Those words. God, those words. After hours of being called a glorified file clerk, hearing my real title from one of the most respected legal minds in America felt like oxygen after drowning. He gestured me into his chambers, where Associate Justice Patricia Morrison and Justice David Kim were already seated around a mahogany conference table that had witnessed decades of constitutional crises. Both nodded respectfully as I entered. Chief Cruz, Justice Morrison said, sliding a thick dossier across the table. We need your magic touch on this one. I opened the file and felt my stomach drop. Emergency petition from the Fifth Circuit. Constitutional challenge to the Voting Rights Extension Act. Oral arguments scheduled for Monday. Tomorrow morning. How bad is it? I asked, scanning the legal briefs. Justice Kim leaned forward. Texas, Florida, and Georgia are arguing that the federal voting oversight provisions violate state sovereignty. They want to gut the heart of voting rights protection. And they chose now because they think the current court composition favors their argument. Justice Hale added grimly. They're not wrong. I absorbed the implications quickly. This wasn't just another case. This was the case that could reshape American democracy. The legal challenge that voting rights advocates had feared for years. And they were bringing it now when the court's conservative majority might be sympathetic. What's our timeline? I asked, already mentally organizing the mountain of precedent law I'd need to review. Briefs are due at 6 a.m., oral arguments at 10. The Chief Justice wants your constitutional analysis before we deliberate. 3 justices, the constitutional fate of American voting rights, 8 hours to craft a legal strategy that could protect democracy itself? No pressure. I'll need access to the precedent database and a research team, I said, my mind already racing through constitutional interpretation theories. Already arranged, Justice Hale said with a slight smile. Conference room B is yours. I took the liberty of pulling the files you'll need. He knew me too well. 7 years of mentorship had taught him exactly how my mind worked. I needed historical context before I could see the constitutional threads. Elena, Justice Hale said as I gathered the files, I know tonight has been eventful for you personally. My cheeks burned. Of course, word had traveled about the family drama. In a building where information was currency, Deputy Marshal Richardson's report had probably reached every chamber within minutes. It's fine, sir. My family situation won't affect my work. I'm not concerned about your work, he said gently. I'm concerned about you. You have sacrificed a great deal for this position. It was my choice. Was it? Or did you make it because your family never gave you the option to be both brilliant and beloved? The question hit like a physical blow. How did he see through me so clearly? Justice Hale, your family didn't deserve to know about your work here because they never bothered to know you, he said firmly. But that doesn't mean you deserved to carry this burden alone. Tears threatened at the corners of my eyes. After years of absorbing my family's dismissal, having someone see the cost of my choices felt overwhelming. I need to get to work, I said, deflecting the emotion. Yes, you do. But Elena, he waited until I met his eyes. What you do here matters, not just to the court, but to every American who believes the Constitution protects their right to vote. Don't let your family's blindness make you forget your own worth. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and headed for conference room B. The research team was already assembled. 6 of the court's brightest law clerks, laptops open, legal databases humming. They looked up as I entered, and I saw something I'd never seen in my family's eyes. Respect. Chief Cruz, one of them said. We've pulled the relevant cases from Harper v. Virginia through Shelby County v. Holder. Start with South Carolina v. Katzenbach, I instructed, settling into the head chair. I need the constitutional reasoning behind federal voting oversight. For the next hour, we dove deep into legal precedent. The 15th Amendment's promise that voting rights couldn't be denied based on race. The long, bloody history of voter suppression in the South, the constitutional authority that gave Congress power to enforce equal protection. My phone sat silent on the table, face down. I could feel it buzzing with messages from my family. But for the first time in years, I didn't care. They wanted answers? They could wait. Democracy didn't pause for family drama. Chief, one of the clerks said, I'm seeing a potential weakness in the state's sovereignty argument. Section 5 of the 14th Amendment clearly grants Congress enforcement power. Exactly, I said, my excitement building. They're trying to argue that voting is purely a state issue, but the Constitution specifically gives Congress authority to protect individual rights against state violations. This is where I belonged, not at family reunions defending my worth, but in rooms where constitutional principles were battle-tested against political pressure, where my analysis could protect the voting rights of millions of Americans. My family thought I shuffled papers. The reality? I helped safeguard the constitutional foundation of American democracy. All right, people, let's save voting rights. By 3 a.m., Conference Room B looked like a legal war zone. Empty coffee cups covered every surface, law books stacked in towering piles, and 6 exhausted law clerks surrounded by the constitutional equivalent of battlefield maps. But we had it, the legal strategy that could save American voting rights. "Walk me through it one more time," I said, pacing behind the conference table where our constitutional argument lay spread across dozens of pages. Sarah Chen, my lead researcher, stood at the whiteboard where she'd mapped our legal reasoning. The states are arguing that federal voting oversight violates the 10th Amendment, that voting regulation is a state power not explicitly granted to Congress. But they're ignoring Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, interrupted Marcus Williams, one of our brightest constitutional scholars. Congress has explicit enforcement authority to protect equal protection rights. That's our foundation, I agreed. But we need more than constitutional text. We need historical precedent that the court can't ignore. I walked to the whiteboard and drew a timeline. 1870. 15th Amendment guarantees voting rights regardless of race. 1965. Voting Rights Act acknowledges that constitutional promises mean nothing without enforcement mechanisms. 2013. Shelby County gutted Section 4 but left Section 5 intact. So we argue that Section 5 enforcement is constitutional bedrock, said Jessica Park, looking up from her laptop. Congress isn't overreaching, it's fulfilling its constitutional duty. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. I pulled up the case that would make or break our argument. Northwest Austin Municipal Utility District v. Holder, 2009. Even the conservative justices acknowledged that voting rights enforcement serves compelling national interests. The room went quiet as everyone absorbed the implications. They can't overturn Northwest Austin without admitting they're abandoning constitutional precedent for political expediency, Sarah breathed. "Which is exactly what they're doing," I said grimly, "but we're going to make it impossible to ignore." My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls from Sofia, 43 unread text messages from various family members. The digital equivalent of panic. But I didn't feel the usual guilt or obligation to explain myself. For the first time in my life, I had something more important than my family's approval. I had constitutional democracy to protect. "Chief," Marcus said, "Justice Morrison needs our preliminary brief in 2 hours." "Then let's finish this." The next 2 hours blurred together. Constitutional analysis, legal precedent, historical context woven into an argument that could reshape American voting rights. This wasn't just legal strategy. It was democracy's last stand against systematic disenfranchisement. At 5:47 a.m., I walked into Justice Morrison's chambers carrying our constitutional argument. She looked up from her own research. Silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Elena, please tell me you have good news." I placed the brief on her desk. "Justice Morrison, I believe we have a constitutional argument that even this court's conservative majority will struggle to dismiss." She opened to the first page and her eyebrows rose. Section 5 Enforcement Authority. You're arguing that federal voting oversight isn't congressional overreach, but constitutional obligation. The 14th and 15th Amendments don't just grant rights. They explicitly empower Congress to enforce those rights against state violations. Voting oversight isn't federal intrusion, it's constitutional duty. Justice Morrison flipped through our analysis, her expression growing more animated with each page. "This historical precedent section, Elena, this is brilliant. You've traced federal voting enforcement from Reconstruction through the modern era." "The Constitution isn't a suicide pact," I said, quoting Justice Jackson, "and it's not a suggestion box. When states systematically undermine voting rights, federal enforcement isn't optional." "Justice Hale was right about you," she said with a rare smile. "You see the human story inside constitutional text." At 9:30 a.m., I sat in the court's observer section as lawyers argued the case I'd spent all night analyzing. The attorney for the challenging states stood at the podium, confident and polished. "Your Honors, the federal government's voting oversight represents an unprecedented intrusion into state sovereignty. The 10th Amendment reserves election administration to the states." Justice Kim leaned forward. "Counsel, what about Section 5 of the 14th Amendment? Doesn't Congress have explicit authority to enforce equal protection rights?" I held my breath. This was our moment. The state's attorney faltered slightly. "Your Honor, Section 5 enforcement must be proportional to constitutional violations. These oversight provisions are outdated and excessive." Then Justice Hale spoke, and I knew we had won. "Counsel, you seem to be arguing that constitutional violations have an expiration date, that Congress's enforcement authority diminishes over time, even when voting discrimination persists. Is that your position?" "No, Your Honor, but because the precedent's analysis suggests otherwise. The constitutional framers explicitly granted Congress enforcement power precisely because they understood that constitutional promises require active protection." Justice Hale was quoting directly from my brief. My constitutional analysis was guiding Supreme Court questioning. After 3 hours of oral argument, the justices retired to deliberate. I knew it would be weeks before they announced their decision, but I also knew we'd given constitutional democracy its strongest possible defense. Walking back through those marble halls, I felt something I'd never experienced in my family's house: the quiet satisfaction of work that truly mattered. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. Sofia. "Elena, please call me back. We need to understand what's happening." For once, I didn't feel the familiar stab of guilt. Sofia wanted to understand now when my importance was undeniable. Where was that curiosity during the years I was building something extraordinary in silence? That evening, alone in my D.C. apartment overlooking the Capitol, I finally opened my phone. The message count was staggering: 127 texts, 43 missed calls, 15 voicemails. My family had discovered that Elena the file clerk was actually Elena who helps run the Supreme Court, and they were spiraling. Sofia's messages told the whole story. 10:23 p.m. "Elena, what the hell was that?" 10:45 p.m. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Should we call someone?" 11:15 p.m. "The Supreme Court? Like, the actual Supreme Court?" 12:03 a.m. "Why didn't you tell us?" 2:47 a.m. "I can't sleep. Please call me back." 4:12 a.m. "Elena, I'm sorry about tonight. I had no idea." 6:30 a.m. "I saw the news. You're really important, aren't you?" 8:45 a.m. "Please don't hate us. We just didn't understand." The evolution from confusion to panic to desperate reconciliation would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. My family's love apparently came with conditions. I had to be worthy of their attention before I deserved their respect. My parents' voicemails were even more revealing. "Mija, it's Mom. We're very confused about what happened tonight. Are you in trouble with the government? Please call us back so we know you're safe." "Elena, it's Dad. I saw on the news about some big Supreme Court case. The reporter mentioned your name. Is that you? Call us when you can." "Elena, it's Mom again. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door saw you on CNN. She said you were identified as some kind of chief something? We don't understand what's happening. And finally, from this morning, Mija, we're so proud of you. We always knew you were special. We just didn't understand your work. Please come home so we can celebrate properly. Always knew I was special. The words made me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. They always knew? When exactly? When Sofia called me the family disappointment at every gathering? When they gave me $20 for graduation while buying Marcus a new car? When they dismissed my Georgetown law degree as nice, dear, without even asking what it meant? Daniel's messages were different. Elena, holy shit, I always knew you were more than they said. I'm sorry I didn't defend you better. You deserved so much more from all of us. I've been thinking about all the times they made you feel small. You were protecting something bigger than their understanding, weren't you? I'm proud of you, not because of your title or your success, but because you stayed kind, even when they didn't deserve it. At least someone understood the cost of my silence. My cousin Marcus, the golden child cardiologist, had sent exactly one message. Elena, I owe you an apology. We all do. Too little, too late, Marcus. Apologies don't erase decades of casual cruelty. But Sofia's messages kept coming throughout the day. Elena, please. I know I hurt you. I was wrong about everything. I keep thinking about all the times I called you ordinary. God, how ordinary can you be when you work at the Supreme Court? I told everyone at work about my sister who helps run the country. I'm so proud of you. We should celebrate you properly. Family first, right? Family first. The phrase that had been used to guilt me into tolerating their abuse for years. Now they wanted to claim me as family because I was worth claiming. I set my phone aside and walked to my living room window. The Washington Monument rose against the evening sky, lit up like a beacon. This city had become more home to me than anywhere I'd ever lived. These marble halls where I fought for constitutional principles felt more like family than the people who shared my DNA. My real family wasn't the one that required a Supreme Court appointment to respect me. My real family was Justice Hale, who saw my potential before I believed in it myself. Justice Morrison, who trusted my analysis with democracy's future. The law clerks who called me chief without irony or condescension. My real family was everyone who valued the work I did, not the title that came with it. The phone rang, Sofia's name on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings, 4, 5. Part of me wanted to answer, to finally have the conversation we'd never been able to have, to hear her say she was sorry and mean it. But a bigger part of me remembered 7 years of family gatherings where I was the punchline. 7 years of pretending their casual cruelty didn't matter. 7 years of making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. The phone stopped ringing. A text arrived immediately. Elena, please, I know I'm angry, but we're family. That has to count for something. I thought about that. Did it count for something? Did sharing parents and childhood memories create an obligation to forgive people who had systematically undermined my self-worth for decades?
Maybe for some people, but I'd spent too many years begging for scraps of approval from people who saw me as a disappointment. I'd built something extraordinary while they measured my worth in comparison to their own achievements. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires investment in the relationship, hope that it could be different. What I felt was something much more final: indifference. My phone buzzed with another text from Sofia. I saw you on the news tonight. They called you one of the most influential legal minds in the country. I had no idea. No idea. That was the problem, wasn't it? After 34 years of being my sister, Sofia had no idea who I actually was. And whose fault was that? Tomorrow, I would help the Supreme Court deliberate on constitutional law that could reshape American democracy. I would sit at conference tables where my analysis influenced decisions that affected millions of Americans. I would do work that mattered, surrounded by people who valued both my mind and my judgment. Tonight, I would finally stop apologizing for being too much for people who had always been too little for me. I turned my phone off and opened a book on constitutional law. Some relationships deserved your energy, others deserved your silence. My family was about to learn the difference. 2 weeks later, I sat in the Supreme Court chamber watching history unfold. The justices filed in wearing their black robes, carrying the weight of American democracy on their shoulders. Chief Justice Roberts took his seat at the center, flanked by 8 associates who would decide the constitutional fate of voting rights. The court will hear arguments in the matter of Texas v. Department of Justice, Chief Justice Roberts announced. Counsel for petitioners, you may begin. The attorney representing Texas stepped to the podium, polished and confident. For 3 hours, he would argue that federal voting oversight violated state sovereignty, that the Constitution granted states exclusive authority over election procedures, that Congress had overstepped its constitutional bounds. I sat in the court observer section, watching lawyers debate the legal framework I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting. My constitutional analysis was about to be tested against the finest legal minds in America. Your Honors, the Texas attorney began. The federal government's continued oversight of state voting procedures represents an unprecedented violation of the 10th Amendment. The Constitution reserves election administration to the states. Justice Morrison leaned forward, and I held my breath. Counsel, what is your response to the enforcement provisions in Section 5 of the 14th Amendment? Doesn't that grant Congress explicit authority to enforce equal protection rights? Perfect. She was following our script exactly. The attorney shifted slightly. Your Honor, enforcement authority must be proportional and temporary. These oversight provisions were designed for different circumstances. Then Justice Hale spoke, and I felt that familiar surge of pride when your mentor elevates your work. Counsel, you seem to be arguing that constitutional violations have an expiration date, that systematic voter suppression somehow becomes acceptable over time. Is that your constitutional theory? The attorney's confidence cracked slightly. No, Your Honor, but circumstances change. The oversight is no longer necessary. Based on what evidence? Justice Kim interjected. The constitutional analysis suggests that voting discrimination has evolved, not disappeared. Justice Kim was quoting directly from page 47 of my brief. My research on modern voter suppression techniques was guiding Supreme Court questioning. I watched the attorney scramble for a response, knowing he was fighting constitutional precedent backed by centuries of legal reasoning. Our argument wasn't just legally sound, it was constitutionally unassailable. When the Department of Justice attorney stepped to the podium to defend voting rights, she opened with the exact framework I had constructed. Your Honors, the Constitution doesn't just promise equal protection, it empowers Congress to enforce that promise. Section 5 of the 14th Amendment creates a constitutional duty, not a political option. For the next hour, she walked the justices through our constitutional roadmap. Historical precedent from Reconstruction through the modern era, legal reasoning that connected 1870s constitutional amendments to 2020's voting challenges, the unbreakable chain of legal authority that made federal oversight not just permissible, but constitutionally required.
Justice Scalia's replacement, Justice Gorsuch, tried to poke holes in our logic. Counsel, doesn't federalism require that states maintain primary authority over elections? Justice Gorsuch, federalism is not a suicide pact. When states systematically undermine constitutional rights, federal enforcement becomes a constitutional obligation, not an option. My words, my constitutional interpretation being argued before the highest court in America. I glanced at my phone during a brief recess. Sofia had sent another message. Elena, I saw you mentioned in the Washington Post analysis of today's case. They called your constitutional brief masterful. I had no idea you were this important. This important. As if my importance was measured by newspaper coverage rather than the work itself. After 3 hours of oral arguments, the justices retired to deliberate. I knew their decision would reshape American democracy for generations. I also knew that my constitutional analysis had given voting rights its strongest possible defense. Walking through those marble corridors afterward, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete professional fulfillment. Not the hollow validation of family approval, but the deep satisfaction of work that truly mattered. Justice Hale found me in the hallway. Elena, brilliant work on that constitutional framework. You gave us the legal foundation we needed. Thank you, sir. Do you think we convinced them? He smiled. I think you made it impossible for them to ignore a constitutional precedent without abandoning judicial integrity completely. That evening, news coverage of the case dominated every major network. Constitutional scholars debated our legal arguments. Political analysts discussed the implications for American democracy. And in every analysis, every expert discussion, they mentioned the constitutional brief that had shaped the court's questioning. My brief, my analysis, my work protecting the voting rights of millions of Americans. My phone rang. My father's number. Elena, we saw you on the news. They said your work influenced the Supreme Court's questions. Yes, Dad. We had no idea you were this... He paused, searching for words. This accomplished. I know. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why hadn't I told them? Because they'd made it clear for 34 years that my achievements only mattered if they were impressive enough for dinner party bragging rights. Because they taught me that my worth was measured in comparison to my siblings, not in absolute terms. I tried to tell you, Dad. You just weren't listening. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of missed opportunities and willful blindness. We're proud of you, Mija. We always were. Always were? The lie was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Dad, you called me a file clerk last month. We just didn't understand your work. You never asked. Another silence. Because what could he say? That 34 years of dismissal was just a misunderstanding? That calling me the family disappointment was somehow compatible with being proud? Elena, we want to make this right. I'm not angry anymore, Dad, but I'm also not going to pretend the past didn't happen. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Capitol Dome, thinking about the constitutional case I'd just defended. Tomorrow, 9 justices would deliberate based partly on my analysis. The work I'd poured my life into was about to influence American democracy for generations. My family wanted to make things right now, that they finally understood my importance, but they'd missed the point entirely. My worth wasn't up for their approval. It never had been. 3 days after oral arguments, I was working late in my office when the news broke. CNN led with the headline, Supreme Court Constitutional Brief Reveals Youngest Chief Legal Strategist in History. The story featured my photo, the official Supreme Court portrait I'd tried to keep from my family for years. The article detailed my role in shaping constitutional law, my influence on major constitutional cases. My reputation among legal scholars as one of the brightest constitutional minds of my generation. My phone exploded. Sofia called 17 times before leaving a voicemail. Elena, your face is on CNN. They're calling you a constitutional genius. I don't even know what to say. Please call me back. My mother's message was pure panic. Mija, your picture is on the television. Mrs. Rodriguez came over to watch with us. She keeps saying, I knew that girl was special. We need to talk. But the most revealing call came from my Aunt Carmen, Sofia's mother, and the woman who'd spent years dismissing my career as government paperwork. Elena, it's Tia Carmen. I just want you to know that I always believed in you. I told everyone you were going to do something important someday. I'm so proud to be your aunt. always believed in me. The same woman who'd literally laughed when I got into Georgetown Law, who'd asked my parents why they wasted money on Elena's education when she could have just gotten married. The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity. By evening, my family's group chat was chaos. Mom, Elena, we saw the news coverage. You're famous. Marcus, cuz you're literally trending on legal Twitter. This is incredible. Sofia, Elena, please call me back. I need to apologize properly. Dad, your mother and I have been calling everyone to tell them about your success. Calling everyone. The same parents who'd spent years downplaying my achievements were now broadcasting them to the neighborhood. Daniel's message cut through the noise. Elena, seeing their reactions is making me sick. They're acting like they always supported you. We both know that's not true. At least someone remembered reality. That night, Sofia showed up at my apartment. The security guard called up to announce her, and against my better judgment, I let her come up. She looked smaller than I remembered. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, but something deflated about her posture. The confidence that had always allowed her to dominate family gatherings seemed to have evaporated. Elena, she said the moment I opened the door, I'm so sorry. For what specifically? She gestured helplessly. For everything. For calling you ordinary, for making you feel small, for not seeing who you really were. I never hid who I was, Sofia. You just never bothered to look. She sank onto my couch uninvited. I know that now, but Elena, you have to understand, we thought you were just filing papers at some courthouse. We had no idea you were running the Supreme Court. I don't run the Supreme Court. But you're the chief legal strategist. You influence their decisions. You shape constitutional law. Her voice carried a note of awe that I had never heard before. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? The question I'd been asked a dozen times in 3 days. Each time it revealed more about them than about me. When? I asked simply. When exactly should I have told you? At Marcus's engagement party when you called me a disappointment? At Christmas dinner when you introduced me as your sister who files government paperwork? During the family reunion when you ask what I actually do, assuming it couldn't be important? Sofia's face crumpled. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Yes, you were. But we can fix this. We can be the family you deserve now. Now. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Sofia, you want to be the family I deserve now that you know I'm worth claiming. Where was that energy for the past 7 years? We just didn't understand. You didn't care to understand. There's a difference. She was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Elena, please, we're family. That has to count for something. I thought about that word, family. What did it mean when the people who shared your blood were the first to diminish your worth? When strangers at the Supreme Court showed you more respect than the people who'd known you since childhood?
Sofia, you spent years making me feel like the family disappointment. You succeeded, but the disappointment wasn't mine. It was yours. You were disappointed in me because you needed someone to be beneath you. That's not true, isn't it? Think about every family gathering, every comparison, every joke at my expense. You needed me to be ordinary so you could feel extraordinary. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of years of casual cruelty. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back 7 years of hiding who I was to avoid your judgment. Sorry doesn't undo the damage of growing up thinking I wasn't enough for my own family. She looked up at me with red eyes. So that's it? You're just done with us? I considered the question. Was I done with them? Or had they been done with me long before I realized it? Sophia, you want me to forgive you because you finally understand my worth, but my worth never changed. Only your perception of it did. She left without another word, and I watched from my window as she got into her car and drove back to a world where importance was measured in titles and news coverage. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls from family members who'd seen more news coverage of my work. Each voicemail was a variation of the same theme: pride, apology, desperate attempts to repair relationships they'd spent years breaking. But for the first time since that night at the family reunion, I felt completely at peace. My worth wasn't up for their approval. It never had been. That evening, sitting alone in my apartment with the soft glow of the Capitol Dome visible through my windows, I finally read all of Sophia's messages from the past week. The evolution was predictable, but still painful to witness. Day 1. Elena, please call me back. This is all so confusing. Day 2. I saw another news article about you. They said you've influenced dozens of major cases. Day 3. Elena, I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this. Day 4. I told my law firm about you. They want to meet you. You could get clients worth millions. Day 5. Mom is beside herself. She keeps crying about how proud she is. Day 6. Elena, please. We made mistakes, but we're family. And finally, tonight, I know I hurt you. I know we all did, but we love you. We want to celebrate you properly. Family first, right? Family first. The phrase that had been used to guilt me into silence for years. The excuse for tolerating casual cruelty because blood was supposedly thicker than respect. I stared at that message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to finally have the conversation we should have had years ago, to hear her apologize and maybe mean it. But a bigger part of me remembered something Justice Hale had told me during my first year at the court. Elena, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot build your worth on the foundation of other people's recognition. My phone rang. Sophia's name on the screen. I let it ring. It rang again, then again. 5 calls in 10 minutes, each one going to voicemail. The messages grew increasingly desperate. Elena, please pick up. I know you're screening my calls. I deserve your anger, but not your silence. We need to work through this. Elena, I'm coming to your apartment. We're going to settle this face to face. Fine, don't answer, but you can't avoid family forever. I'll wait in your lobby until you come down, however long it takes. I looked out my window and saw her car in the parking lot below. Sophia, the woman who had called me ordinary at every family gathering for 7 years, was camped outside my apartment building demanding my attention. The irony was staggering. My phone buzzed with a text. Elena, I see your lights on. I know you're home. Just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. She wanted 5 minutes to undo 7 years of systematic diminishment? Instead of responding, I walked to my kitchen and made tea. Chamomile, the same blend Justice Morrison had introduced me to during late-night constitutional research sessions. I sat at my kitchen table with my steaming mug and opened a book on Supreme Court history. The phone kept ringing. Sophia kept texting. I kept reading. An hour later, Justice Hale called. Elena, I hope you don't mind the late hour, but I wanted to tell you something important.
Of course, Justice Hale. The constitutional analysis you prepared for the voting rights case, it's being cited by legal scholars across the country. Harvard Law Review wants to publish your framework as the definitive interpretation of Section 5 enforcement authority. That's incredible news, sir. But that's not why I called. His voice grew gentle. I called because I know this has been a difficult week for you personally. The media attention has made your family situation complicated. Yes, sir. Elena, I want you to remember something. Your worth was never determined by their recognition. You've been extraordinary since the day you walked into this building. Their sudden awareness of your importance doesn't make you more valuable. It makes them late to the party. Tears stung my eyes. Thank you, Justice Hale. History will remember your work, Elena. The constitutional principles you've helped establish will protect American democracy for generations. That's your legacy. Not your family's approval, but the justice you've helped preserve. After we hung up, I looked down at the parking lot. Sofia's car was still there, a stubborn shadow in the darkness. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who desperately wanted her family's love, who absorbed their criticism and convinced herself it was constructive, who made herself smaller so they could feel bigger. That girl was gone. In her place sat a woman who had helped shape constitutional law, who had spent sleepless nights protecting voting rights, who had earned the respect of the most brilliant legal minds in America through competence, not connections. My phone buzzed one more time. Sofia's final message. Elena, I'm going home. But this isn't over. You're my sister, and I won't give up on us. I love you, and I hope someday you can forgive me. I read the message twice, then did something I'd never done before in my entire relationship with Sofia. I blocked her number. Not out of anger, but out of peace. I was finally free from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval from people who had never valued me enough to know me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities for relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Full of space for people who had earned their place in my life through consistency, not genetics. I looked at my phone's home screen, now blissfully quiet, and felt something I'd never experienced before: complete emotional autonomy. My worth wasn't up for a family vote. I defined it by the work I did, the principles I protected, and the life I had built brick by brick while they called me ordinary. Tomorrow, I would return to the Supreme Court, where my analysis influenced decisions that shaped American democracy, where colleagues respected my judgment, valued my insights, and trusted my constitutional interpretation. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully for the first time in 34 years, knowing that I was finally completely free. The girl who begged for crumbs of family approval was gone. In her place stood Chief Legal Strategist Elena Cruz, who had helped safeguard the constitutional foundation of American democracy. And she didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. 1 year later, I wake up to sunlight streaming through my apartment windows. Real sunlight, not the harsh fluorescent glare of emergency calls at 3 a.m. For the first time in 7 years, I'm not reaching for my phone to check for constitutional crises or family emergencies masquerading as disasters. Coffee in my own kitchen, a view of the Washington Monument turning golden in the morning light, the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived on my own terms. My apartment has changed too. Gone are the stark walls of someone always ready to flee at a moment's notice. In their place hang photographs of real moments. Justice Hale presenting me with the Constitutional Scholar Award, the research team celebrating after our voting rights victory, me and Justice Morrison laughing over dinner at her home, surrounded by her family who treats me like a beloved daughter. My chosen family. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of federal voting oversight, with Chief Justice Roberts writing the majority opinion that quoted my constitutional framework extensively. The decision protected voting rights for millions of Americans and established precedent that will endure for generations.
Generations. Legal scholars still cite my analysis as the definitive interpretation of congressional enforcement authority. But that's not what changed my life. What changed everything was learning the difference between being seen and being valued. My phone buzzes gently. A text from Daniel. Elena, saw your interview in Legal Times. You looked happy, really happy. I'm proud of you for choosing yourself. Daniel,
The only family member who understood that my silence wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. He visits sometimes, usually alone, and we have the kind of conversations I always wished I could have with my siblings. Real conversations about life, work, dreams. Conversations where I'm not performing worthiness for someone else's approval. He told me last month that my parents ask about me constantly, that Sofia has been in therapy trying to understand why her apologies weren't enough, that the family gatherings feel hollow without someone to diminish in order to elevate themselves. They finally realize what they lost, Daniel said, but they still don't understand why you left. Because they're still thinking in terms of loss and gain, as if relationships were transactions, as if 7 years of casual cruelty could be balanced with belated recognition. My doorbell rings. Through the peephole, I see a delivery man holding a massive bouquet. My heart sinks briefly. Has Sofia found another way around my blocked number? But the card reads, "Congratulations on your promotion to Senior Chief Legal Strategist. The court is lucky to have you. Justice Hale and the entire Supreme Court family." My promotion! At 35, I'm now the youngest senior chief in Supreme Court history. The position comes with greater influence, a larger office, and the kind of respect that my birth family spent years convincing me I didn't deserve. The irony isn't lost on me. The family that called me a disappointment is now desperate to claim credit for my success, while the family I chose continues to celebrate my growth without expecting anything in return. I arranged the flowers in my kitchen thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who would have read this card and immediately felt guilty for not sharing the moment with people who had spent years diminishing it. The one who would have called Sofia despite everything, seeking approval that was never freely given. That girl was trying so hard to be worthy of love that she forgot to notice she was already worthy of respect. My laptop chimes with an email from Harvard Law School. "Dear Chief Cruz, we would be honored to have you deliver this year's commencement address on constitutional law and social justice." Harvard wants me to speak to the next generation of lawyers about justice and perseverance. Me, the family disappointment who was supposedly just filing papers at some courthouse. I accept the invitation immediately. Later that afternoon, I'm walking through Georgetown when I run into my mother outside the grocery store. She looks older, more fragile than I remember. For a moment, we just stare at each other across the frozen foods aisle. "Elena, you look good. Happy." "Thank you. We miss you at family dinners." I nod but don't respond. What could I say? That I don't miss feeling small in rooms full of people who shared my DNA? That I've discovered what it feels like to be valued for my mind rather than tolerated for my presence? She asks about you. She wants to try again. "Mom, some relationships can't be repaired. They can only be ended with dignity." Her face crumples slightly. "But she's your sister. She's the person who spent 7 years making me feel worthless. The fact that we share parents doesn't obligate me to accept that treatment. We raised you better than this. Family comes first." There it is. The phrase that was used to justify years of emotional cruelty. Family comes first, so swallow the insults. Family comes first, so tolerate the comparisons. Family comes first, so make yourself smaller for everyone else's comfort. Mom, you raised me to believe my worth was determined by other people's approval. You raised me to think love came with conditions. You raised me to accept less than I deserved because asking for more was selfish. Elena, but you know what you didn't raise me to do? You didn't raise me to protect the constitutional rights of 330 million Americans. You didn't raise me to influence Supreme Court decisions. You didn't raise me to become one of the most respected legal minds in the country."
She stares at me, tears forming in her eyes. "I did that myself. While you were measuring my worth against Sofia's achievements, I was building something extraordinary. While you were apologizing for my ordinary career, I was shaping American democracy. We're proud of you now. Now, when it's convenient, when my success is undeniable enough to brag about at church. I shake my head. Mom, I don't need your pride anymore. I spent 34 years begging for it, and it nearly destroyed me. The silence stretches between us, filled with all the conversations we should have had but never did. I love you, she whispers. I know you do. But love without respect is just obligation, and I'm done living my life to fulfill other people's obligations. I walk away, and for the first time, leaving doesn't hurt. It just feels like choosing myself. That evening, I have dinner with Justice Morrison and her husband at their home in Georgetown. Their daughter Sarah, a sophomore at Yale, peppers me with questions about Supreme Court cases over homemade lasagna. Chief Cruz, when you argued the constitutional framework for voting rights, did you know it would become the definitive precedent? I knew it was constitutionally sound, I tell her, but precedent requires judicial acceptance. I gave them the legal foundation. They decided to build on it. That's so cool. I want to clerk for you someday. Justice Morrison laughs. Sarah, Chief Cruz will probably be on the court herself by the time you're qualified to clerk. The suggestion doesn't seem impossible anymore. 5 years ago, I would have dismissed the idea as fantasy. Now I know my worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. After dinner, Justice Morrison and I sit on her back porch with wine, watching the sunset paint the D.C. skyline in shades of gold and pink. Elena, you seem different lately. Lighter. I feel different. The family situation? Justice Morrison knows the broad strokes. Brilliant legal mind discovers that cutting toxic family ties is the healthiest choice she ever made. I spent so many years trying to earn love that was supposedly guaranteed by genetics. It took me until 35 to realize that guaranteed love isn't conditional love. And now? I think about my life now. Morning coffee without anxiety, work that fulfills rather than distract from personal pain, relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Now, I know the difference between being tolerated and being treasured, between being seen and being valued, between biological family and chosen family. She smiles. It shows. You've been brilliant for years, but now you're also at peace. I finally stopped apologizing for being too much for people who were too little for me. The next morning, I walk into the Supreme Court building and nod to the security guards who know me by name. In the elevator, I'm joined by 2 law clerks who greet me with genuine warmth, not the careful politeness reserved for authority figures. Morning, Chief. Ready for the constitutional challenge hearing? Always. In my office, I review briefs for cases that will shape American law for decades. My analysis will guide judicial decisions that affect millions of lives. My constitutional interpretation will become part of the permanent legal record. This is what I was meant to do, not perform worthiness for people who confuse love with comparison, but protect the constitutional principles that ensure justice for all Americans. My assistant brings me coffee in the morning schedule. Chief Cruz, you have the Harvard commencement speech draft to review, the American Bar Association interview at 2, and Justice Hale wants to discuss the upcoming constitutional symposium. A life of purpose, surrounded by people who value my contributions and celebrate my success without needing to claim credit for it. My phone sits silent on my desk. No desperate messages from Sofia. No guilt-inducing calls from parents who suddenly remember they have a daughter when she makes headlines. No family drama masquerading as emergency communications. Just peace.
At lunch, I meet with a group of young lawyers who seek my mentorship. Brilliant minds who remind me of myself at their age. Hungry for justice, desperate to make a difference, unsure if they're smart enough to belong in rooms where constitutional law is decided. Chief Cruz, one of them asks, "How do you handle people who don't believe you deserve your position?"
First, you stop needing their belief to validate your worth, I tell her. Second, you let your work speak louder than their doubts. And third, you remember that other people's limited vision of you has nothing to do with your actual potential. But what if those people are your family? The question hits close to home. Then you love them from a distance, if at all. You choose the family that chooses you back. That evening, I return to my apartment and stand at my window overlooking the Capitol Dome. The same view that comforted me through the darkest period of family rejection, when I thought isolation was the price of self-respect. I was wrong about the isolation part. I'm not isolated. I'm selective. I'm not missing out on family. I'm choosing better relationships. I'm not alone. I'm finally in my own company. My reflection in the window shows a woman who no longer flinches when her phone rings, who no longer apologizes for her success, who no longer needs external validation to know her own worth.
Tomorrow, I'll wake up and protect constitutional democracy. I'll influence legal decisions that safeguard American justice. I'll do work that matters, surrounded by people who mattered to me. Tonight, I'll sleep peacefully in a life I built myself, brick by brick, while people who shared my DNA called me ordinary. Your worth isn't up for a family vote. You define it by the life you build, the principles you protect, and the people you choose to walk beside you. I chose myself. I chose justice. I chose a family that chose me back. And I've never been happier to disappoint people who never deserved my efforts to please them in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.